The summer heat was already brutal at 9 a.m. as retired Colonel Jack Barnes pulled into the dusty parking lot of Andrews Air Force Base. His old Honda Civic looked out of place among the flashy trucks and SUVs, but Jack didn't mind. He'd driven, here for one reason, to see the A-10 Thunderbolt demonstration at the Thunder Over America Air Show. At 73, Jack moved slower than he used to. His wooden cane, carved by his late wife Margaret, helped steady him as he made his way across the sprawling lot. The faded olive flight jacket he wore had seen better days. The patches were so worn you couldn't read them anymore, and the color had bleached to something resembling desert sand. 50,000 people, he muttered to himself, watching families stream toward the main gates. Kids ran ahead wearing plastic pilot helmets, while veterans proudly displayed their unit caps. Jack pulled his weathered A-10 cap lower against the glare and joined the slow procession. He'd told no one he was coming today. Not his daughter Sarah, not his grandson James, not even his old squadron buddies. Some experiences were meant to be private, and seeing the aircraft that had defined his life's work was one of them. He wanted to be just another face in the crowd, an anonymous old-timer enjoying the show. The walk from the parking area seemed longer than he remembered from previous years. His knees protested with each step, and his back still carried phantom pain from an ejection over Kuwait 35 years ago. But Jack pressed on, driven by something deeper than nostalgia. In his jacket pocket he carried a small notebook filled with handwritten calculations and detailed sketches. To anyone else they'd look like random engineering drawings, but these pages contained the mathematical foundation for the GAU-8 Avenger cannon, the massive weapon around which the entire A-10 had been designed. As Jack finally reached the main viewing area, the announcer's voice boomed across the tarmac. "Ladies and gentlemen, in just 15 minutes you'll witness the awesome power of the A-10 Thunderbolt II, the tank killer that changed modern warfare forever." Jack smiled slightly, remembering when those words would have been classified. Now they were entertainment for the masses. He found a spot near the barrier, close enough to see every detail of the aircraft he knew better than his own reflection. What Jack didn't notice was the photographer already moving through the crowd, or the retired Air Force officer who'd done a double take at his profile. He definitely didn't see the teenagers nearby, scrolling through their phones and looking bored. The stage was set for an encounter that would change everything. "First blood, excuse me," Jack said softly to a group of teenagers pressed against the viewing barrier. "Mind if I stand here for a better view?" The 5 teens, all around 17 or 18, exchanged glances. The leader, a kid with perfectly styled hair and expensive sneakers, looked Jack up and down with barely concealed irritation. "I guess," the teen said, stepping aside just enough to create minimal space. "But don't lean on me, okay?" Jack nodded his thanks and carefully positioned himself against the metal railing. From his pocket, he withdrew his worn notebook, its pages yellowed with age. As he opened it, detailed sketches of the GAU-8 cannon system became visible, precise technical drawings that showed every angle and measurement. "My grandfather was a pilot," Jack offered conversationally, hoping to connect with the young people around him. One of the teens, a girl with dyed purple hair, smirked. "Yeah, everyone's grandpa was a pilot. Probably just drove the fuel truck." Another whispered loudly enough for Jack to hear, causing the group to snicker. Jack's weathered hands tightened on his cane, but he said nothing. He'd faced worse than thoughtless teenagers. His mind briefly flashed to nights over Iraq, when anti-aircraft fire had lit up the sky like deadly fireworks, each glowing tracer representing dozens of unseen rounds seeking to tear his aircraft apart. A young girl nearby noticed his drawings. and pointed them out to her father. "Look, Dad, he has pictures of the plane." Her father glanced over, then quickly pulled his daughter away. "Don't bother the old-timer, honey." Jack watched them go, disappointment flickering across his face. He'd always enjoyed explaining engineering principles to curious young minds. His own grandson had sat for hours on his knee, listening to stories about thrust ratios and combat maneuverability long before he could even read. The announcer continued his enthusiastic introduction. The only aircraft built entirely around its gun, the A-10 carries the most powerful aircraft cannon ever mounted, 7 barrels delivering 70 rounds per second. Jack nodded imperceptibly. At the technical details, his lips moving silently as he mouthed specifications seconds before the announcer stated them. His fingers unconsciously traced the outline of the aircraft in his notebook, following familiar contours he had helped refine decades earlier. "Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Captain James Barnes in the A-10 Thunderbolt II. Jack's eyes widened slightly at the name, but he said nothing as the crowd roared approval. On the horizon, the distinctive silhouette of the aircraft appeared, ungainly by conventional standards, but beautiful to those who understood its purpose. As the A-10 approached for its demonstration, Jack stood straighter, momentarily forgetting his cane. He knew that sound intimately, the unique thunderous roar that ground troops in combat zones, described as the most beautiful sound in the world, because it meant help had arrived. But the teenagers around him remained unimpressed. One scrolled through his phone, as if the demonstration was hardly worth his attention. "That thing is so ugly," he commented dismissively. "Why do they even still fly those dinosaurs?" Jack bit his tongue. He could have explained how that dinosaur had proved its worth in every conflict since its introduction, how troops cheered when they learned A-10s would be providing their air cover rather than faster, more modern aircraft. But he remained silent. This wasn't the time for lectures, or so he thought. The mockery escalates as the A-10 began its demonstration routine, showcasing the remarkable low-speed handling that had made it legendary among ground troops. More spectators pushed forward. Jack found himself jostled repeatedly, nearly losing his balance as the crowd grew more excited. "Hey, Gramps!" called a man in his 40s, pushing past without apology. "Maybe sit in the bleachers if you can't stand that long." The teenagers laughed at the suggestion. One of them noticed Jack's intense concentration as he tracked the aircraft with unusual precision, his weathered eyes following every maneuver with technical appreciation rather than mere spectator excitement. "Look at him," the boy snickered to his friends. "Probably thinks he knows how to fly it because he watched Top Gun." Another teen mockingly imitated Jack's focused expression, squinting dramatically and nodding at the aircraft. The group dissolved into laughter, their cruel amusement drawing attention from nearby adults who either looked away uncomfortably or smiled indulgently at the harmless teenage antics. Someone bumped Jack's cane, nearly causing him to fall. Only his quick grip on the barrier saved him from going down. The teenager responsible didn't even notice, or if he did, he didn't care. Jack steadied himself, his face remaining impassive despite the disrespect. He'd learned long ago that some battles weren't worth fighting, especially when the opponents didn't even realize they were in one. But not everyone in the crowd was oblivious. A retired Air Force officer standing 20 feet away did a double take as he glanced at Jack's profile. There was something familiar about the weathered face, the way he tracked the aircraft with such technical knowledge. The officer studied Jack more carefully, noting the faded patches on his jacket and the military bearing that age couldn't quite hide. The officer pulled out his phone and typed something quickly. His eyes widened as he read the search results. Then he looked back at Jack with growing recognition. Meanwhile, a photographer moving through the crowd to capture reaction shots paused as his lens focused on Jack. Something about the patch partially visible beneath a fold in his jacket caught his attention. He zoomed in, then lowered his camera slowly, disbelief crossing his face. The patch, faded but still discernible, showed the distinctive logo of the original A-10 development team, a unit so secretive that few outside the highest military circles even knew of its existence. The photographer raised his camera again, this time capturing several clear images of Jack's face. He then stepped away, typing furiously on his phone. As the A-10 completed another impressive maneuver, the announcer's voice crescendoed, "Captain Barnes will now demonstrate the precision attack capabilities that made the Warthog famous during a desert storm." Jack straightened slightly, standing taller despite his cane, his lips pressed together in a thin line, almost as if he was mentally calculating the approach vector himself. After thousands of hours in the cockpit, the mathematics of flight had become instinctual. The teenagers continued their commentary, oblivious to the growing attention their target was receiving from others in the crowd. "I bet he's got a whole scrapbook of airplane pictures at home," one whispered loudly. "Probably tells everyone at the nursing home he was a fighter pilot," another added. But as they spoke, the retired officer who'd recognized Jack was making his way closer, speaking urgently into his phone. The photographer had already sent his images to the airshow coordinator's office, and high above, Captain James Barnes was receiving a message through his headset that would change everything. The crowd watched in anticipation as the A-10 lined up for what should have been a routine demonstration pass. None of them, especially not the mocking teenagers, had any idea what was about to happen. The unexpected break, the A-10 began its approach run, descending toward the demonstration area, where target silhouettes had been arranged. The crowd noise built to a fever pitch as children covered their ears in anticipation of the thunderous cannon simulation. But then something unprecedented happened. Just as the A-10 reached the ideal attack position, the aircraft suddenly banked, hard left, breaking dramatically from its carefully choreographed demonstration pattern. The crowd's eager cheers faltered, replaced by confused murmurs. "Ladies and gentlemen," the announcer's voice held clear confusion, "this is not part of the planned demonstration." Radio chatter increased over the PA system as the control tower attempted to communicate with the pilot. The aircraft continued its deviation, banking again and slowing dramatically, a maneuver rarely seen in air shows. "Captain Barnes, please confirm you are returning to the demonstration pattern," came a controller's voice over the speakers. No response came as the aircraft approached the crowd line, flying unusually low. The A-10's distinctive nose dipped slightly, as if the pilot was searching for something or someone among the sea of upturned faces. The teenagers who had been mocking Jack suddenly looked uncertain. This wasn't normal airshow behavior, and even they could sense something significant was happening. "What's wrong with it?" one asked nervously. "Is it going to crash?" another whispered. Jack felt a sudden tightness in his chest that had nothing to do with his old injuries. Somehow, impossibly, he knew exactly what was happening. His eyes filled with unexpected tears as he realized his grandson had spotted him in a crowd of 50,000 people. Military officials who had been watching the demonstration with growing concern now moved quickly through the crowd. The retired officer who'd recognized Jack was pointing in his direction while speaking urgently into a radio. A senior officer, a full general based on the stars adorning his uniform, approached swiftly, the crowd parting before him as he made his way toward Jack. The general studied Jack's face for confirmation, recognition dawning in his eyes. Then he raised his hand in a formal salute. "Colonel Barnes," he said loudly enough for those nearby to hear, his voice carrying absolute certainty. "This is an unexpected honor, sir." The teenager's laughter died instantly. The word "Colonel" hung in the air like an electric charge, causing heads to turn throughout the immediate area. Jack returned the salute crisply, his posture transforming as years of military bearing reasserted themselves. The change was remarkable. The frail old man with the cane had suddenly become every inch the career officer he'd once been. "General Morrison," Jack replied, reading the man's nameplate. "I was hoping to observe quietly. I'm afraid that's no longer an option, sir," the general said with a slight smile. "Your grandson has some explaining to do about breaking demonstration parameters, but I can't think of a more appropriate reason." The crowd around them had fallen silent, sensing they were witnessing something extraordinary. The teenagers who had mocked Jack stood frozen, their earlier confidence evaporating as the reality of their mistake began to sink in. Above them, the A-10 continued its unauthorized maneuver, positioning itself directly over where Jack stood. What happened next would silence the entire airfield and reveal the true identity of the man they dismissed as just another old-timer. The aircraft executed 3 perfect wing dips, left, right, level. The universal aerial signal known as the missing man formation, a pilot's highest tribute to fallen or honored comrades. It was a salute rarely seen outside of memorial services or military funerals, and it was being performed for a man the crowd had completely overlooked. The truth. Revealed, a collective gasp rose from the crowd as understanding began to dawn that they were witnessing something profound but unexplained. The missing man formation was unmistakable to anyone with military knowledge, and its significance rippled through the gathering like a shockwave. The announcer, now comprehending the magnitude of what was happening, spoke with newfound reverence. "Ladies and gentlemen, Captain Barnes is performing the missing man tribute. This is quite unprecedented." Military officials continued to converge on Jack's position. The general who had saluted him was now flanked by several other high-ranking officers, all treating the elderly man with obvious respect and deference. The senior crowd fell completely silent as the officer held his salute, the A-10 still circling overhead in its tribute pattern. 50,000 people held their collective breath, sensing they were witnessing living history. The teenagers who had mocked Jack earlier looked on in confusion that quickly morphed into embarrassment and then horror as they realized the magnitude of their mistake. The boy who had made the fuel truck comment leaned toward his friend, whispering urgently, "Google him right now." The friend's hands shook as he typed on his phone. Within seconds, his eyes widened in shock as he showed the screen to the others. Limited but telling information about Colonel Jack Hogg. Father Barnes's distinguished career and his crucial role in the A-10 program filled the search results. "Holy," one whispered, the profanity dying on his lips as the full weight of their behavior hit him. "That's really him," another breathed. "That's actually him." The announcer's voice, now thick with emotion, broke the silence. "We have just been informed that among us today is Colonel Jack Barnes, the original test pilot of the A-10 Thunderbolt II program." A ripple of surprise moved through the crowd like wildfire. People turned to stare at the unassuming elderly man who had stood quietly among them, invisible in his ordinariness until this moment of extraordinary recognition. Colonel Barnes not only helped design the aircraft's iconic cannon system, the announcer continued, but rewrote combat tactics during Desert Storm that saved countless American lives. And yes, that is his grandson, Captain James Barnes, currently piloting the aircraft above us. The big screens around the airfield now displayed split-screen images, archival footage of a young Colonel Barnes standing beside a prototype A-10, flight helmet under his arm, juxtaposed with the aircraft currently flying overhead. The family resemblance between the young colonel in the historical footage and the current pilot was unmistakable. The general lowered his hand and extended it for a handshake. "Your grandson has some explaining to do about breaking the demonstration parameters," he said, though his tone held admiration rather than censure. "But I can't think of a more appropriate reason." "He always was headstrong," Jack replied, his voice stronger than it had been all day. "Gets that from his grandmother." The transformation in the crowd was immediate and profound. Those who had ignored or even mocked the elderly man now looked at him with newfound respect, even awe. Veterans who recognized the name approached, offering handshakes and words of gratitude. The young girl who had noticed his notebook earlier had returned with her father, who now looked at Jack with proper reverence. "Sir," he began hesitantly, "my daughter was wondering about your drawings. Would you mind?" Jack smiled, truly smiled, for the first time that day. "I would be delighted to explain them to her," he said, kneeling despite his stiff joints to bring himself to the child's level. "You see, when we were designing this aircraft, we had to solve a problem no one had tackled before," he began, opening his notebook to show her the intricate sketches. As he spoke, sharing knowledge that had once been classified at the highest levels, the A-10 continued its demonstration overhead. But now it wasn't just an air show. It was a testament to American engineering and the bond between the men who flew it, a bond that spanned generations and had just revealed itself in a moment of unexpected recognition. The teenagers stood nearby, no longer laughing, but listening intently, perhaps learning the most important lesson of their young lives about judgment, respect, and the quiet heroes who walk among us. The reckoning as the A-10 completed its tribute circle and returned to its demonstration pattern. The teenagers who had mocked Jack earlier stood frozen in shock. Their world had shifted fundamentally in the span of minutes, and the weight of their behavior pressed down on them like a physical force. The boldest of them, the one who had made the fuel truck comment, approached hesitantly. His earlier swagger had evaporated completely, replaced by genuine shame that was painful to witness. "Sir," he began, his voice barely above a whisper, "we want to apologize for how we acted. We had no idea who you were." Jack regarded them thoughtfully, his weathered face showing neither anger nor smugness, just the patient understanding of someone who had seen enough of life to know that teachable moments were precious gifts. "You know," he said, after a long pause. "The most important lesson I learned in my military career is that you never know who you're standing next to or what battles they've fought. That person you dismiss might just be someone who changed history in ways you can't imagine." The teens nodded, properly chastened, but also clearly fascinated. The phone screens they'd been so absorbed in earlier now seemed insignificant compared to the living history standing before them. "Could you tell us about flying the A-10?" one asked tentatively. "What was it like the first time?" As Jack began to share stories with the growing crowd around him, a commotion arose at the security perimeter. A group of Army veterans, many wearing desert combat uniform items and clearly from the Gulf War era, were attempting to gain access to the restricted area. They were respectful but insistent, explaining something to security personnel that couldn't be heard at a distance. The base commander signaled for the security team to allow them through. As they approached, Jack recognized the unit patches. They wore desert-faded but still distinct. Colonel Barnes, the leader of the group, said, his voice thick with emotion. "I'm Sergeant Major Reynolds, retired. My men and I were with the 3rd Infantry Division during Desert Storm." Jack nodded in recognition. "The highway of death operation." "Yes, sir," the Sergeant Major confirmed. "We were pinned down by Republican Guard units taking heavy fire from positions we couldn't see clearly because of the smoke and sand. We'd called for air support, but were told visibility was too poor for most aircraft to operate effectively." His voice broke slightly as he continued. "Then we heard that sound, sir. That beautiful, distinctive sound of A-10s coming in low. They made pass after pass, taking heavy fire, themselves but never breaking off. The enemy armor was decimated and our entire unit made it out alive." The Sergeant Major reached into his pocket and withdrew a worn, sandy-colored patch. "We learned later that you were personally involved in developing the specialized attack patterns those A-10s used that day. That you had insisted on tactics that prioritized ground protection, even at increased risk to the aircraft." He extended the patch, which Jack recognized as a specially made unit patch created after the battle. "Sir, every man in my unit came home to his family because of those decisions. We've been hoping to give this to you for 30 years. It would honor us greatly if you would accept it." Jack took the patch with reverent hands, recognizing it as something far more precious than the many official medals and commendations he had received over his career. This came from the men whose lives had been saved, the ultimate validation of his life's work. "The honor is mine, Sergeant Major," he said quietly. "This means more to me than you can know." The exchange was captured by nearby cameras, the emotional moment broadcasting live to millions. Viewers around the world shared in the powerful recognition of the human impact behind military technology and tactics. One by one, the veterans approached to share brief accounts of that day, each with a story about how the A-10's intervention had changed the course of their lives. They spoke of homecomings that might never have happened, of children and grandchildren who existed because Colonel Barnes's aircraft had brought their fathers and grandfathers home safely. The teenagers watched in stunned silence, beginning to understand the true magnitude of the man they had so carelessly dismissed. This wasn't just about airplanes or military history. This was about the lives of real people, families that had been preserved by decisions made decades earlier by the elderly man they had mocked for wanting a better view of an air show. "The Honor Flight Colonel Barnes," the base commander said, approaching with obvious excitement. "If you're willing, we've arranged a special addition to today's program. With your permission, we'd like to have you join Captain Barnes in the 2-seat training variant of the A-10 for a heritage flight pass." Jack's eyes widened with surprise. "You want me to fly only as a passenger, sir?" the official clarified quickly. "Captain Barnes would be at the controls, but we thought it would be a fitting tribute to have you airborne in the aircraft you helped create." Jack glanced at his grandson, who had just landed and was being escorted over in a golf cart. James was trying and failing to conceal his enthusiasm for the idea, his eyes bright with the prospect of sharing a cockpit with his grandfather. "I hadn't planned on flying today," Jack said slowly. "But I suppose some plans are meant to be changed." A cheer went up from the crowd who had overheard the exchange. The idea of seeing the legendary test pilot back in his element, even as a passenger, electrified the atmosphere. Medical personnel were quickly summoned to ensure Jack was physically cleared for the flight, while a flight suit in his size was procured from the base's supplies. Captain Barnes helped his grandfather change in a private area, carefully securing each strap and connection with the precision that had been drilled into him throughout his training. "I remember when I used to help you into your flight suit," Jack remarked with a smile. "You were a lot less patient about it," his grandson replied with a laugh. "Always rushing, telling me to hurry up because the sky was waiting." "The sky is always waiting," Jack said softly. "That's what makes it so miraculous. No matter how many times you go up, it's always there, always new." As they emerged, the crowd erupted in applause at the sight of Colonel Barnes in flight gear once more. The years seemed to fall away from him as he walked toward the aircraft, his posture straight, his movements purposeful. This wasn't an elderly man with a cane. This was an aviator returning to his element. The two-seat training variant of the A-10 waited on the tarmac, its canopy open in invitation. Ground crew stood at attention as the two Barnes men approached, rendering salutes that were crisply returned. Captain Barnes climbed up first, taking the front seat as pilot in command. Jack followed more slowly but without assistance, settling into the rear seat with movements that spoke of muscle memory developed over thousands of flight hours. "Ladies and gentlemen," the announcer's voice carried across the facility, "we are privileged to witness a truly historic moment. Colonel Jack Barnes, original test pilot and development team leader for the A-10 program, is about to take to the skies once more in the aircraft he helped bring into existence, accompanied by his grandson, Captain James Barnes, representing the current generation of Warthog pilots." The A-10 began to taxi toward the runway, gathering speed with deliberate purpose. As it passed the main viewing area, both Barnes men raised their hands in acknowledgement of the cheering crowd. "Tower, Warthog. 27 requesting permission for special heritage flight with distinguished passenger." Captain Barnes's voice came over. "The public address system. Warthog 27, permission granted. You are cleared for takeoff on runway 30, winds light and variable. The sky is yours, gentlemen." The A-10 aligned with the runway, paused momentarily as final checks were completed, and the engines roared to full power. The aircraft surged forward, gathering speed until it lifted cleanly into the afternoon sky, banking gracefully into a climbing turn that took it directly over the airfield. Inside the cockpit, Jack felt the familiar sensations of flight envelop him, the vibrations of the aircraft speaking to him in a language he had never forgotten. Through the canopy, he watched as the earth fell away, perspective shifting as it always did when one left the ground behind. "How does she feel, Grandpa?" Captain James's voice came through the intercom. "Like coming home," Jack replied simply. Below them, 50,000 people watched in awe as history took wing once more. Legacy. Written in sky, the A-10 completed its initial circuit and began a series of carefully choreographed maneuvers designed to showcase the aircraft's capabilities while remaining well within safety parameters for a passenger flight. Captain Barnes handled the controls with expert precision, demonstrating the perfect blend of technical skill and intuitive feel that had made him one of the top pilots in his squadron. From the ground, the crowd watched in awe as the aircraft, that many had dismissed as ungainly, performed with unexpected grace, its movements fluid and purposeful against the blue canvas of the sky. "What you are witnessing," the announcer explained, "is more than just an air demonstration. It is a living connection between generations of aviators, between those who created this remarkable aircraft and those who continue its legacy today." As the A-10 completed its routine and made a final pass over the field, Jack's voice unexpectedly came over the public address system. Someone had patched his intercom into the announcement system. "I have been blessed twice in my life," he said, his voice clear and strong despite the background noise of the aircraft. "First, to be part of creating an aircraft that has served its purpose so well for so long. And second, to see my grandson carry that legacy forward with skill and dedication that makes this old pilot's heart soar higher than any aircraft ever could." There wasn't a dry eye on the airfield as the A-10 made its final approach and landed smoothly on the runway, taxiing back to the viewing area where the crowd waited in reverent silence. When the canopy opened and Jack emerged, standing carefully on the ladder as he removed his helmet, the applause was deafening. As he descended to the ground, he was immediately surrounded by the veterans who had shared their stories earlier, each eager to hear his impressions of the flight. But before he could speak to them, the young girl who had returned his notebook pushed her way forward. "Was it amazing?" she asked, her eyes wide with wonder. Jack knelt down to her level once more. "Beyond amazing," he told her sincerely. "And someday, if you study hard and follow your dreams, you might design the next aircraft that changes everything." The girl nodded solemnly, clearly taking his words to heart. "I'm going to draw my own planes," she promised, "and they'll protect people too." "I believe you will," he replied, and in that moment, he truly did. As the formal ceremonies concluded, and the crowd began to disperse, Jack found himself reflecting on the unexpected turn his quiet day had taken. He had come to the air show as an anonymous observer, hoping to enjoy the aircraft that had defined his career without fanfare or recognition. Instead, he had been reminded of something he had somehow forgotten in his retirement, that the work he had done, the decisions he had made, the innovations he had contributed, they had mattered. They continued to matter, not because of the technology itself, but because of the lives that technology had saved and protected. The teenagers who had mocked him earlier approached one final time, their demeanor completely transformed. Respect and admiration had replaced dismissive arrogance. "Sir," one began, "we wanted to apologize again for how we acted earlier. We had no idea who you were or what you had done." "That's the point, isn't it?" Jack replied gently. "None of us ever truly know the stories of those around us, the battles they've fought, the contributions they've made. Perhaps the lesson here is to approach everyone with the respect they deserve, not because of who they might turn out to be, but because everyone has value and a story worth knowing." The teenagers nodded solemnly, a life lesson learned more powerfully than any classroom could ever provide. As Jack walked away from the airfield with his family, his grandson carrying the cane that had been forgotten hours earlier, he glanced back one last time at the A-10 silhouetted against the sunset. From ugly duckling to war-proven savior, the aircraft had defied expectations throughout its long service life, much like its designer. It had never sought the spotlight, but had simply done its job with quiet efficiency, earning the gratitude of those who understood its true value. In the days that followed, video of the unexpected tribute and the revelation of Jack's identity spread across social media and news outlets worldwide. Veterans shared their own stories of A-10 interventions that had saved their lives in combat zones from Iraq to Afghanistan. Military aviation enthusiasts debated the aircraft's technical merits with renewed appreciation for the engineering that had gone into its creation. But perhaps most significantly, the story prompted conversations about the unsung heroes walking among us, the men and women whose contributions shape our world in ways we rarely recognize until someone like Captain Barnes performs an unexpected tribute that reveals their presence. 1 month after the air show, Jack received an invitation to speak at the Air Force Academy. Standing at the podium before hundreds of cadets, his cane nowhere in sight, he delivered a message about purpose, perseverance, and the true meaning of service. "Your aircraft, whatever you might fly, is not merely a machine," he told them. "It is a promise to those who depend on you, a promise that when all other options have failed, when hope seems lost, you will be there. Make that promise the foundation of everything you do, and you will never go wrong." As he concluded his speech, to thunderous applause, Colonel Jack Barnes stood tall, a living bridge between aviation's past and its future. His legacy secured not by the recognition he had never sought, but by the lives saved through his lifetime of dedicated service and innovation. Sometimes the greatest victories come not from seeking glory, but from doing what's right when no one is watching, and being ready when the moment comes to show the world what quiet heroes can accomplish. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and become a part of our Everyday Life Stories community. Where are you watching from? Drop a comment below. We love hearing from our amazing viewers around the world.